G'day legends, and while the rest of the MMA community wants to be jumping on the story of Conor McGregor bashing yet another helpless civilian at an Ibiza nightclub, Conor can't get away from it, I thought we'd look at some pretty interesting comments from Matt the Immortal Brown talking about Francis Ngannou, and also thought we would just touch base with Julianna Peña, because unfortunately I was the one leading the Julianna Peña fan club going into UFC 316, so I feel somewhat personally responsible to sort of wrap this one up and put a bow on it, and thank God she went and spoke to Ariel Helwani and was an absolute excuse machine. So that's what we're going to be getting into in today's video. Now, the first thing that I wanted to get into, like I said, was Francis Ngannou. He's shoved himself right back into the news cycle by rocking up to UFC Atlanta. Apparently, he had a meeting with Hunter Campbell, which is very interesting. I like the idea of Francis and the UFC talking to each other again because, let's face it, there is nothing happening for Francis down at the PFL. If the UFC doesn't have enough talent for a heavyweight division, what is the PFL going to be doing? And I believe Francis's next opponent in the PFL still needs to get paid $2 million. So I don't know how the PFL are planning on making any money from this Francis Ngannou situation. But apparently he was talking to Hunter Campbell, but we do know he was at the UFC. He was on stage. There were UFC cameras on him. And to go from the UFC literally editing out his name when Israel Adesanya brings him up to having him on stage, to me looks like we are moving in the right direction between patching up this relationship between Francis Ngannou and the UFC. All we have to do is get Dana White out of the way, and I see no roadblocks there at all. But Matt the Immortal Brown was talking about it on his podcast, and he was saying that legacy-wise, he's already forgotten in terms of the heavyweight division in MMA. I think legacy-wise, he has damaged his legacy tremendously, which is very interesting, right? Because I think this sort of cuts down the center of the GOAT conversation, and Francis Ngannou is going to be one of these high watermarks, or one of these road markers that is going to separate the hardcores from the casuals going forward. You know, like if you have been in the world of MMA for quite some time, you were starting to already, well, you have been feeling that way, like for a couple of years, you know, as we transitioned out of the tap-out beanie era, the WEC era, the Strikeforce era, and then we moved into the Reebok era, which is where I am from as an MMA fan. And then we moved past the Reebok era, and now we're in the Venom era, into the post-pandemic era, the Apex era. You're already seeing the way people like to twist and weave the GOAT conversation, you know, and people that came along in the Reebok era, like myself, yeah, they have just completely forgotten about your Fedor Emelianenkos. Like, I am not a fan of putting Fedor Emelianenko in a GOAT list at all. In any way at all. I'm just not a fan of it. I think Pride had a lot of sus fights that went down. I think there was a lot of matchmaking that happened at Pride. Yeah. I don't know how Fedor would have gone over in the top competition of the UFC, and then the old screeching tap-out beanie wearing blokes are going to go, mate, back in 2005, 2006, 2005, 2007, there was no top competition in the UFC. Pride was the peak of MMA. You know, this is where the conversation, the grid is going to come from. But my point is, the hardcores know about Fedor Emelianenko and know that he does deserve to be in that conversation somewhere. And I think we're going to have the same problem with Francis Ngannou going forward. Like what Matt Brown has said here on its face, kind of true, right? Like, is Francis Ngannou moving to the PFL and getting those losses over at boxing, is that overall bad for his legacy? Does it take him out of the greatest heavyweights of all time conversation? There's certainly going to be an argument for that for the younger generation when they look back at these times that we're in now. You know, once Tom Aspinall is done with the John Jones business, and that's whether or not he fights John, that's whether or not Tom actually beats Jones, that's whether or not Jones actually beats Tom, that's whether or not everything just moves on and Tom gets 3 or 4 defenses. You know, once this era of heavyweight that we're in right now, your Tom Aspinalls, your John Joneses, your Sergey Pavloviches, your Cyril Gans, once we're 3 or 4 years separated from this, where is Francis Ngannou going to sit in that conversation, because Francis is still sort of relative here on the back end of that conversation. You see, to me, as a Reebok era guy, Francis Ngannou is still burned into my memories as one of the most scary men on the planet there is, right? I remember the amount of promotion that the UFC was putting behind Francis Ngannou. He hits like a bloody forward escort going down a highway, mate, and this has all been proven to be true since then. But Francis Ngannou, right, he was sold to us as the scary, I am the baddest man on the planet. Remember this back then? He was sold to us as the scariest man on the planet. And Stipe Miocic just had to grapple him and wet blanket him and hold him down just to get the win over him. And then when Francis came back and he actually learnt just a modicum of wrestling, just enough wrestling to be able to get back up and actually sleep Stipe. What was it, the second round? Shocked off the first takedown. Second round he slept Stipe. Was it the first one? I'm not sure. I'm going off memory. But it all hung on that first takedown attempt, and Francis learnt the wrestling. And then he went in there with Cyril Gane, had a close first 2 rounds with Cyril Gane, and then he leaned on his wrestling and won the fight. Barely, but won the fight with that. And then he goes and he leaves the UFC and he fights Tyson Fury, one of the best boxers on the planet right now. And whatever you want to say about whether or not Tyson didn't take him seriously, whether or not Tyson was on his way out of his career, whatever you want to say about that, we need to remember, we, the MMA community, need to remember just how looked down upon we are by the vast majority of the combat sports community when it's us going into boxing. When it's MMA going into boxing, we are expected to look like complete fish out of water. We're not meant to know the sweet science. Our stance is meant to be too open. We're meant to be too slow. We're not meant to have the right fundamentals with the feet, because MMA fighters, I say we like I'm an MMA fighter, but I mean our team MMA. The stance is completely different, because you've got to be ready to sprawl and low kick and control range in just a completely different way. And when Francis went over there and fought Tyson Fury, he shocked the world. He shocked the world. And yeah, he lost to Anthony Joshua, but still, then he goes over to PFL, and remember the way that they were selling. What's his name? Who cares what his name is? Renan Ferreira, it doesn't matter. It's the PFL. It is literally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It goes UFC, Ryzen, One Championship, Cage Warriors, maybe BKFC. The PFL is nothing. But the point is, this was the second best-ish heavyweight. This was the best heavyweight free agency could find. Renan Ferreira was the best heavyweight that free agency could find. And Francis Ngannou absolutely flatlined him. Absolutely flatlined him. There is an argument to be made, right? When Francis Ngannou walks away from the UFC and gets robbed against Tyson Fury, that he is the lineal MMA and boxing champion of the world. Now, I know that I just talked about Anthony Joshua and I just talked about Renan Ferreira down at PFL, where the competition levels just don't matter. But that night, after Francis Ngannou not slept, but beat Tyson Fury, there's an argument that he is the lineal UFC boxing champion of the world. And to say that that is just going to be forgotten legacy going forward, I think it's right, but it's sad to me. It's sad to me. And now, just as the old tap-out beanie-wearing guys need to carry the torch for Fedor Emelianenko, and talk about how these young fans, mid-range unk fans, don't understand how good Fedor was, and the little broccoli-headed Gen Z fans, they don't understand how good Fedor was. Just the way that the tap-out beanie guys go, I feel like as a Reebok-era dude, I need to carry the torch going forward to these young buck Venom, Apex fans, these degenerate gambling fans that are only into the sport for their sick parlays, mate. I think I need to carry the torch going forward, you don't know how dangerous Francis Ngannou was, mate. One touch and you are going out. There was a point where Francis Ngannou was the king of the combat sports world, and we can't just throw that legacy away just because he didn't stay with the UFC. And even to this day, I still wonder, and I think to myself, Francis Ngannou versus Tom Aspinall. If you watch Tom Aspinall fights closely, in every single Tom Aspinall fight, there's always one of those moments where he's leading in with his chin, looking for his shot over his jab, and he gets touched on the chin just by a fraction, just by the smallest of margins, because he's so good at just sliding the chin out of the way. It's almost like he uses his goatee as a rangefinder, you know what I mean, mate? So the question is, right, when it comes to Tom Aspinall versus Francis Ngannou, what lands first? What lands first? Does Tom Aspinall duck underneath that shot like he did against Andrei Arlovski, or was it Alexander Volkov? Whatever. Does he duck underneath the shot and get Francis Ngannou down and put him in a sick Kimura, right? Does he finish Francis Ngannou with a bit of grappling and wrestling because Francis's game isn't that high? Or does Francis still have the speed and the power to land that shot on Tom Aspinall's goatee, and how does Tom Aspinall take it? Does he go to sleep? Because Aspinall's boxing, for as phenomenal as it is a little bit open. He's admitted that himself in interviews. So even today, in Big 2025, I consider Francis Ngannou a bigger challenge to Tom Aspinall than John Jones or Cyril Gane, making Francis Ngannou, if not the most dangerous man on the planet Earth, but the second most dangerous man on the planet. And to have a talent like that reduced to a sentence of his legacy isn't going to matter going forward is truly sad to me. And it's also so sad because it's kind of right. Like, if you're not in the UFC, the legacy conversation, it takes a small, select bunch of real hardcore fans to stay invested in the sport and then to keep carrying that narrative forward. Because as long as this sport goes on, the UFC gets to keep pumping out their own narrative. You know, the UFC has buried all memories of Fedor Emelianenko. It's buried all memories of Dmitry Mitromouse Johnson, still not in the UFC Hall of Fame to this day. It creates its own legacy. And when, just like we celebrated 35 years of UFC, when we celebrate 50 years of UFC, when we get to UFC 400, when we celebrate 100 years of UFC, the UFC is going to pick from its own roster of names and the people that were good to the company. You know, the Poiriers, the Fergusons, the Stipe Miocic's. You know, he's going to pick from that pool of names. And the people who slighted the company that were phenomenal talents, your Fedors, your Francises, they are going to fall into the background. So, as crazy as what Matt Brown has said here, it's kind of true, man. It's kind of true, and it makes me very, very bloody sad. Now, just to put a pin in bloody Julianna Peña, because we know that she is not enough of a talent or enough of a name to be worthy of getting her own video, even if I do only get 200 or so views with this video. If it was a Julianna Peña video, you'd get like 30 views, mate. But Julianna Peña talked about why she lost to Kayla Harrison, and just being such a humble queen in defeat. It wasn't because of the talent of Kayla Harrison. It was because of all the injuries that Julianna Peña was carrying into that fight. Let's take a look.
I was plagued with several injuries leading up to that fight, and it was not a good camp for me in that sense, because I knew that I was going into the fight with a pretty severe handicap.
There's nothing better than a fighter talking mad trash leading up to a fight. And then the first interview, shout out to Sean O'Malley, because Sean O'Malley's been so humble in his defeat. But classic Pen Dog, the first interview after this, and it was because of my injuries. She goes on. She's going to get into specifics. What was wrong with her?
Sure. So in about the second week of May, I want to say I broke my thumb on my training partner, and it was swollen. It looked like somebody had hit me in the hand with a hammer. And it was really difficult to grip. It still is right now, very difficult to grip, and to have grip strength. So that was a big one. But then about a week and a half after that, I took a really bad,
That's why her striking was so bad, because she couldn't grip. That's why she throws two fists at once, because she can't grip. I'll give her something to grip.
And after that, the 29th of May, I took a really bad fall in the octagon, and I tore my elbow and broke off like a ton of bone chips so that I wasn't able to like straighten my arm or bend my arm fully. And so I worked on that for a few days before I left to fight week. But
she couldn't straighten or bend her arm properly. Very interesting, considering the submission she got caught in. Very convenient.
Every day it was just worse and worse and worse, and it looked like somebody like whacked me in the back of the elbow with a baseball bat. It was just so swollen. And the MRI, the X-rays showed a tear, and it showed a lot of bone chips in the back of that. So I got going into a fight 10 days out after having a tear like that and all those bone chips. And
10 days before the fight, her elbow was swollen up like a tennis ball 10 days before the fight. Love to check the embedded or the countdown series.
Just having the wear and tear from the golfer's elbow and the cauliflower elbow on both sides. It's just excruciating, and it's very painful. It's hard to throw a punch. It's hard to extend. It's hard to grip. It's hard to bend. And the same arm that she isolated and was able to Kimura. So I had no strength to be able to fight that. And then dog it with 5 seconds left in the round.
Golly, it was the same arm. What do you know? Just the same arm that had the... This is the perfect face. This is the perfect Julianna face to pause on. What do you know, bloody golly? The same arm she absolutely blew apart 10 days before that there's no footage of anywhere. That just happened to be the same arm that Kayla Harrison, the way better grappler and bigger fighter, just latched up a Kimura on. Gah! Yeah, the luck of it. The absolute luck of it, mate. You hate to see it. So there you go. Julianna Peña, always humble in victory and defeat. And she's going to sit out until the winner of Kayla Harrison versus Amanda Nunes is ready. And she's just going to jump back in there. Anyway, good luck on your dreams, sweetheart. Anyway, that's it. They're my thoughts on Francis Ngannou. They're my thoughts on the delusion, the living delusion that is Julianna Peña. If this is your first time here, g'day, welcome. My name's Dougie. I'm making a video every single day of the week, and I try and go live at least 3 times a week. So if you want to know when all that drops, just hit that notification button down there and that subscription bell, so you know when all that happens. Let me know down there in the comment. Did I do already? Did you know down there in the comment? Doesn't matter. Like the video if you like the video. If you're one of the paying members of the channel, thank you so much. Sorry, microphone. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.